Welcome to Neural Nexus Podcast, where we explore the hottest topics shaping the world. Let's dive in.
All right, so today we are going on a deep dive, and we are heading to the Arctic Circle.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, specifically Greenland,
Okay.
where a recent election took a bit of a surprising turn.
Right.
And get this, Donald Trump might have actually played a role in the outcome.
Really?
Yeah, so we're going to be looking at this really interesting article from Al Jazeera today.
That's a great hook.
I know, right?
It definitely highlights how interconnected our world is. You know, an offhand comment from a former U.S. president could actually potentially sway voters on the other side of the world.
It's pretty wild, right? It's kind of mind-blowing.
Yeah.
But before we get into all the Trump stuff, let's set the scene a little bit for the listeners.
Okay.
Greenland, as you might know, is a semi-autonomous territory of Denmark.
Right.
It's strategically super important because of where it is and because of all the resources that it has. And also there's this growing independence movement.
Yeah.
So we've already got kind of a complex situation even before we get into the election.
Yeah. Absolutely. And I think that context is really crucial for understanding this election. The desire for independence is a major driving force in Greenlandic politics.
Right.
But so are concerns about economic stability and their standard of living. So it's really kind of a push and pull there.
Yeah, so how did this election actually shake out? Well, the article points out the center-right Democratic Party pulled off a surprise victory.
Yeah.
They're considered to be pro-business, and they're known for advocating for a more gradual approach to independence.
And their victory was pretty decisive, too. The
Yeah.
pro-independence Nalarak Party, which actually a lot of people thought was going to win, came in second,
Interesting.
which suggests that maybe Greenlanders are feeling a little bit hesitant about like a super fast push for full independence.
Yeah, especially with external pressures like Trump's infamous offer to buy Greenland back in 2019.
Right.
I mean, wouldn't you say that kind of statement, regardless of how serious it was meant to be, would create some anxiety among voters?
For sure. It's definitely plausible. Imagine, you're a Greenlander, and suddenly your country's fate is being thrown into question by a foreign power. That's going to be a little unsettling. And even in the article, Greenland's prime minister, when he called this election, said it was a serious time for the nation. So, it's hard not to see those external factors coupled with the internal economic concerns potentially influencing the outcome.
For sure. And speaking of external factors, the article also points to the growing interest in the Arctic from, major players like Russia and China. This just adds another layer of complexity to the whole situation.
Absolutely. We're not just talking about a local election here. We're talking about Greenland.
Yeah.
It's sitting right in the middle of this growing geopolitical kind of tug of war with countries vying for, access to resources and strategic advantage in the Arctic.
Yeah, this whole situation is feeling less like a local election and more like a high-stakes game of Risk with Greenland in the center of the board.
I think that analogy holds up pretty well. Greenland is trying to chart its own course while navigating the interests of global superpowers.
Right.
So it's a very delicate balancing act.
Totally. So to understand how we got to this point, let's take a little detour into Greenland's history.
Okay, history lesson time.
Yeah, so Greenland, as we said earlier, has been tied to Denmark for centuries. It was a colony until 1979 when it gained home rule.
Right.
And then in 2009, it secured the right to declare full independence.
Yeah.
But, as I'm sure you know, declaring independence and actually going through with it are two totally different things.
Yeah, they are.
There are still these concerns about the economic stability and the potential impact on people's everyday lives and their livelihoods.
Right, because Greenland is currently pretty heavily reliant on subsidies from Denmark. So a key part of this whole debate over independence revolves around, how to create a sustainable economy that can actually support the population. And the article captures this really well with a personal story.
Oh, yeah, the anecdote about Tudor Linge Larsen, the bank employee.
Yeah, exactly.
That was really eye-opening.
She's a great example of how these abstract political debates have very real consequences for everyday people.
Right.
So she wants independence for Greenland, but she's also worried about what might happen to the economy if they rush into it. She even mentioned being concerned about ending up with a healthcare system like the one in the U.S. under Trump.
Oh, wow.
Which is a pretty stark contrast to what they have now.
Right. It is a powerful reminder that behind these political maneuvers are real people with real concerns about how these changes might affect their lives.
Exactly. And it speaks to the complexity of the situation in Greenland.
Yeah.
It's not just independence versus dependence.
Right.
It's about balancing that desire for self-determination with a very real need for economic security.
Hmm.
And all of this is happening against a backdrop of, increasing global interest in the Arctic.
Yeah. It's a lot to unpack, that's for sure. But before we get too overwhelmed, let's take a moment to reflect on what we've learned so far.
So we've established that this Greenland election was influenced by way more than just local politics.
Yeah, it really does feel like we're watching this pivotal moment in Greenland's history.
Yeah.
And the results of this election seem to really reflect that tension. The article mentions that the two traditionally dominant parties, Inuit Ataqatigiit and Siamet, both of which also favor a more cautious approach to independence.
Right.
They saw a huge drop in their combined vote share.
Yeah, that's a really important detail to note because it suggests that maybe voters were looking for like a stronger and more unified voice when it comes to navigating this whole complex situation,
Yeah.
even if it meant shifting towards a different party.
I wonder if some voters felt like the incumbent parties just weren't doing enough to really address those concerns about the economy.
Yeah.
Or, maybe even the pace of independence.
Right.
Maybe they saw the Democrat as a more decisive option.
It's possible. And the article kind of hints at this potential shift in the political winds with a quote from Demokraatit leader Jens Frederik Nielsen.
Oh,
He basically said that people want change and they want to find ways to fund their welfare system through business and not just rely on Danish subsidies.
that sounds like a very direct message, especially given all the concerns we were just talking about.
Totally. And the article also pointed out that even though Greenlanders voted for more autonomy back in 2009,
Right.
there are still lingering anxieties about what full independence would actually look like
Yeah.
and how it would affect their quality of life.
Which brings us right back to Tudor Lynch Larson's story. She wants independence,
Right.
but she also doesn't want to lose the security of things like universal health care. It's a really tough dilemma.
It is. And it highlights the, like we were saying before, the very real human element at the heart of all of this political debate.
Right.
It's easy to get caught up in these big abstract ideas of, self-determination and national sovereignty.
Okay.
But at the end of the day, people want to know that their basic needs are going to be met.
Okay, so let's connect this back to the bigger picture. We've got Greenland, a country grappling with all of these internal tensions over independence and economic stability. And then we've got these external pressures from global superpowers, all circling the Arctic, kind of like hungry polar bears.
That's a pretty vivid image, and I'd say it's not entirely inaccurate.
Right.
The Arctic is becoming more and more important in terms of resources and strategic positioning, and Greenland just happens to be right smack in the middle of it.
So what does this all mean for Greenland? It seems like they're facing some really, really tough choices. How do you see this playing out?
Oh, I don't have a crystal ball.
Of course.
But I think what we can say for sure is that Greenland is kind of at a crossroads. They have this deep desire for self-determination, but they also have to be realistic about the economic challenges that come with full independence.
Right.
And they have to figure out how to manage all this increasing attention from powerful nations without compromising their own interests.
It almost feels like they're walking a tightrope.
It does, and it raises some really important questions about the future, like how will they balance this desire for independence with the need for economic security? How will they manage all this increasing attention from global powers?
Yeah.
And how will they ensure that the voices and concerns of everyday Greenlanders, like Tudor Lynch Larson, are heard and addressed throughout this whole process?
Those are some million-dollar questions.
Uh-huh.
And while we don't have all the answers, what's so fascinating here is that this election and this Al Jazeera article that we're talking about gives us a glimpse into just how complex this situation really is.
Totally. It challenges us to think critically about the forces that are shaping not just Greenland's future, but the future of the entire Arctic region. And it reminds us that even events that might seem really isolated can have repercussions on a global scale.
It's like dropping a pebble in a pond and watching the ripples spread out and touch everything.
Exactly. And those ripples are only going to get bigger as the Arctic continues to melt and become more accessible.
Right.
It's a really dynamic and evolving situation, and it definitely demands our attention and understanding.
So to bring this back to you, our listener, I think this deep dive shows just how important it is to stay informed and engage with these complex global issues.
Yeah.
What's happening in Greenland might seem far removed from your everyday life, but in reality, it's part of a larger story that affects us all.
And it's a story that is still being written. What choices will Greenland make? How will those choices affect the Arctic and the rest of the world? These are questions that we all need to be thinking about.
And as we wrap up this deep dive, we want to leave you with one final thought-provoking question to ponder. Okay, so we've explored the surprising election results in Greenland. We dove into the complex history and the internal struggles, and we even touched upon some of those global forces at play. But the big question is, what does all of this mean for the future?
Yeah, that's really the heart of it, right? And this Al Jazeera article, while it doesn't give us all the answers, it does give us some pretty valuable clues.
Right, we've seen how this election wasn't just about picking a political party.
Right.
It was about Greenland trying to define its own path forward, balancing that desire for independence with the need for economic stability, and doing all of that while navigating a global landscape that's becoming more and more focused on the Arctic.
Exactly. So here's the question that we'll leave you with today. Given this increasing global interest in the Arctic, what role will Greenland play in the future? And how will its people figure out how to balance their aspirations for, governing themselves with the need for economic security in a world that is becoming increasingly unpredictable?
It's a question that really requires us to think about not just the politics, but also the social and economic realities of Greenland.
Yeah.
It's a question that deserves our attention and our engagement.
And, it's not just about geopolitics and resources. It's about the lives of the people who call Greenland home. Their hopes, their dreams, and their right to self-determination. By listening to their voices and understanding their perspectives, we can gain a much deeper understanding of the challenges and the opportunities that are facing this incredible region.
So we really encourage you to keep exploring this topic, to seek out those different viewpoints and stay curious about what's happening in Greenland and the Arctic. Because what happens in this remote corner of the world really does have the potential to impact us all.
Until next time, keep diving deep.